Western scholars taking it more interested in these kind of, but we want to see more African works or African scholars working on to look at these externalization and recording some of these precarity in this area as well. So how do African states actually negotiate their sovereignty, their security and protection of migration? It's also a question for research to look into. Then the emerging mobility. So the South-South migration is expanding. There's already quite a voluminous amount of work on it, but this requires more comparative framework. So how do we do a comparative studies or research on some of these experiences in different parts of the continent? Secular and seasonal migration will not stop, it will increase within regional labor markets. Growing role of the diaspora will also come up, and other generations, as we talked about, is going to also feature more in the discussion of development. Growing need for African epistemologies, migrant voices, and decolonial perspective is coming up. And tackling or how to track this data infrastructure, donor priorities, and global geopolitics, and how they shape. Yes, I'm ending soon. Okay, I'm ending. This is the last slide. Will also be something that is interesting for us to look at. So to conclude, African mobility research in a changing world will require reframing the narrative. The narrative that migration is an adaptive strategy is important. African-led research is also crucial for inclusivity. And we need to reframe mobility as an opportunity and not crisis, as external partners tend to emphasize on. African perspective must be central to African mobility research and policy. And again, there is the need to move beyond the Eurocentric and securitized framing for African mobility research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwaku Arhin Sam. That's very insightful. We are so grateful to have you. It's now time for questions and answers, contribution, or any further insight that any of us might have. So I open so we receiving questions and answers. You can raise your hand and I'll call you, or you can also unmute and contribute. Thank you very much. Anyone ready for any questions, contributions, please?
Hello, yeah, Madam Chair, if it's okay, I might want to make a contribution.
Please go on.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, my brother, for a fantastic presentation. That was really good. It covered a whole host of issues that are topical, especially to do with the continent. It was fascinating to hear, your comments on the diaspora engagement aspect of things, where the emphasis is mostly on what nation states get from members of their diaspora, and very little attention is paid to what we have to offer to the diaspora. And I'm making this comment within the context of the Ghanaian experience, where we drew up a policy, a national policy to manage relations with our Ghanaian diaspora towards socioeconomic development. And we use Alan Gamlin's conceptual framework, which requires, among other things, the extension of rights to the diaspora. But when we finished drafting the policy and then we presented it to government, it went to cabinet, and that second strand was the only one that was struck out. We're instructed to take it out because government doesn't have funds to extend rights to migrants, which just brings it back to the old-fashioned approach of extractive relations between the home country and then the diaspora. And the attitude that makes it look like the diaspora necessarily owe the homeland something. These are private trips at their own expense, so you have to give them reason to engage. But increasingly, African governments are adopting a very wrong approach. We are in the process of trying to revise the policy to reincorporate the extension of rights as a key pillar to diaspora engagement. And yeah, so thank you very much for highlighting that aspect. I was particularly touched by that because it's a topical issue that is of concern if you want to have proper relations with the diaspora. Thank you very much.
Hello. Any other contribution, please?
I think Theophilus has his hand up. Cardinal, yeah.
Yes,
Theophilus.
Cardinal, please.
Yes. Good day to everyone, and thank you, Dr. Arhin Sam, for this presentation. Very comprehensive, touching on most of the aspects of migration and mobility. Yeah, but I don't know whether mine is the question or I want to get your views also on the question that you said we need to also think about. How do African leaders negotiate their sovereignty? And I think this is connected to the fact that in Africa, we don't have a formidable force for negotiating our rights and then trying to do what we think is good for us. So, and the same thing boils down to, if you also look at studies on migration issues, for some time, issues of integration became very topical, but for some time now, casual gleaning of the literature, you find that it's not so topical as it used to be. And this also transcends into the scholars in the area of migration when it comes to collaborations and cooperations in research. We are very disjointed. We will tend to more collaborate with Western scholars than within the African scholars within the African continent. And it also boils down to the funding, which is also another challenge in research, because collaboration with Western scholars may provide some funding that will support research work. And if you look at most of the bigger research in the area of migration, as you mentioned, they are all donor funded and they are all external funding. So I think these are the challenges that we are facing in the area of migration, and until we try to unite, come together, and focus on how to tell our own story from our own perspective. And then, and because in terms at the national level or even at the AU level, that unity is also not there. We also don't have a source of funding for funding research that we can be more independent. So I don't know, what's your view on these issues as well?
Thank you. You're definitely right. You're definitely right. I mean, you said don't bite the hand that feeds you, and this has been the trend all along. But also, let me give you a typical example. So anytime I'm supervising theses on the continent, it's different from how theses from other countries outside the continent are rating. In our thesis, there's always the recommendation part. And I ask myself, government should do this, government should do that. I ask myself, which government are we talking about? How many of our theses or even end up there? And I think this is why such a platform is very, very important. The African Mobility Scholars Association. It's not that we don't have the possibility or what it takes to do, but I think we, like you mentioned, Theophilus, that we tend to rather focus on other things. And sometimes the priority is not really, we tend to be recommending, but not really recommending. It's like we are begging for the government and the policymakers to listen to us. We can be loud enough. And I always say, I have some training that I offer even on policy papers, how to convert some key findings from our research into policy papers. We can publish those ones as well. Yes, maybe they might not read, and truthfully, they will not read. But we need to start from somewhere. That's what I can say. And at least now, it's not that we don't know. We know the challenges that are out there. The question is, how do we go about it? So in this changing world, we have different platforms. We have the social media platform. We've seen how government these days react to whatever is happening on social media. How are we taking advantage as researchers as well in these spaces to make our research very down to earth and practical to people, for the politicians or whoever is in charge to actually start thinking about some of these. And let me connect this to what Prof mentioned. In fact, this diaspora kind of thing, it's becoming like a blackmail kind of thing. And if you look at the trends where nations are attracting young, talented and all that, a time is coming where if you're a country, you will have to just sit up to attract to maintain even your own brains, so-called brains, in that matter. Because if you don't do that, now you say you don't have money, it will cost you even more as time goes on. So we still have the luxury to still blackmail and say you have to give back to your country, you have to give back to your country, but it is not the other way around. So just to connect that, it's a very important, and thank you for sharing that practical example. It's a big issue that not only Ghana, I've worked with other countries that are also having the same challenges on the continent as well, in terms of the perspective we have for some of these topical issues.
Thank you, Doug. Aziz, if you can ask your question.
All right. That was really brilliant, Dr. Arhin Sam. It was really great in terms of the overview that you gave about mobility and connecting or narrowing it down to migration. I don't know, but it's like mine is not a question, but then it is more to use myself as a case study and in a way trying to highlight another area of research, which in a way, I don't know, not so many people are researching on it, but then it's a bit connected to that issue of mobility and all that. That is to talk about the context where I am researching. Is basically about presence. And I come from a background in migration studies, and most of the people on this platform coming from Center for Migration Studies. That is where I had my master's degree. And so after my master's degree was to try to see how I can explore spaces of presence. And right from the conceptualization of my PhD proposal, I thought I was really doing something new as the only person trying to connect migration to present research. But then it was when I started the program that I realized that there was that kind of massive scholarship within prison space about the movement of prisoners and other people within confined spaces. That is to say, some of this research within the African context are still at the initial stages, and it is high time we draw people's attention to that. So for instance, you ask yourself, people that are moving from other places, either other Western African countries or China, coming to do galamsey and other things. If they are arrested and all that, where do they end? What are their experiences and all that? That is to say, there's that connection between the prison space and then even the free society that we find ourselves. And there are so many forms of movement going on within that space. I just wanted to draw our attention to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we take others and then.
Okay. Takaldisa. Then afterwards, Owusia will ask a question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. I just wanted to speak to an issue that you partly raised in your in just the response you gave a few minutes ago regarding the diaspora, where I wonder if you could speak more to the aspect of remittances vis-a-vis the brain drain, because the common narrative seems to be like romanticizing remittances as, the remittances from Africa into Africa are increasing. They've exceeded official development assistance and all. And I wonder if that is a good thing vis-a-vis the brain drain that is happening on the continent, and how do we strike a balance between that? And then tied to that, I was also just looking at the research areas that you pointed out on the aspect of irregular migration, where some of the countries on our continent have probably tried to go the way of bilateral labor migration agreements as a way of curbing irregular migration, but also as a way of creating employment. What is the state of research or the outcomes of the BLMAs that have been negotiated on the continent? Are they benefiting us as Africa? And do we have effective monitoring mechanisms, at least, that can tell us whether the people that are going under such agreements are benefiting not only for themselves in terms of their outcomes, whether it's health, whether it's the abuse or exploitations that occurs abroad, etc. So I wonder if you could speak more to that in terms of our research agenda, and then finally the way our research ends in terms of all the publications, all the researches that we do, the money or the different opportunities that come from outside the continent on my African migration. But yet when it comes to the knowledge production, I think we don't make it so much in terms of our science into the international publications, the international journals. And I know like this platform is one of the platforms of maybe mitigating that, but what else can be done so that at least our science is also something that is taken on board? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello, Stella. Can I?
Yes, please, Owusia, you can. Yes, please.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doc, for this very informative presentation. Yeah, listening, I realized that the presentation was heavily focused on the first leg of your topic, that is the African mobility research, where you gave a wide range of themes within the mobility studies, but with very silent on the changing world. So please, I want you to just help me. So what is changing? When you talk about changing world, what do we mean by changing world? Because we know that migration does not happen in a vacuum, and potential migrants often respond to environmental triggers to whether to decide to move or not to move. So if you can help me with, when you talk about changing world, what is it? That's the second leg of the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for the questions. And let me say, there are some of you who are still more experts than myself. So my input, if it is not enough, others are also welcome to add other comments to it. First, let me say the changing world. So the changing world, usually from how I understood this is to look at more of how things are going to be, looking at the current trends. How is it going to be in the future, or how should we redirect ourselves, taking into consideration the things that are informing our current practices or current situations in the world. That's how I took it. That's why I focused a lot more. I think if you look at the research, I look at the future trends. The future trends is based on analysis of how things are going to be changing and what we should look out for going forward. So this is where I capture. So I mentioned the changing world, for example, the demographic is changing. The youth population is going to be increasing. So if this is changing, or this is part of the changing world that we are supposed to see, then how do we approach that? And I gave an example of some of the issues we should pay attention to when this is happening, when these changes are happening. So the demographical changes, the technological aspect of it, I mentioned it, that yes, these platforms are coming and they're gonna be influencing the way we see things. So this is what I considered as the changing world. The changing world is things that we should look out for as and when we progress in our research as well. There are so many things, as I mentioned, that we have to look out for. Last week, there was a lot of focus on AI and everything. It's part of the changing world, but I didn't go into that aspect because that was covered really well last week. But I looked at some of the other things that are changing or that are going to be changing, and how we can think about researching in these areas. Now, I will go on to the prisons questions, and actually that is why migration is very, very, very multidisciplinary approach. This falls into international law, areas of international law, international diplomacy, international relations, and all that. So in case of talking about the typical example of transferring people from one country prison to the other, it's really borders on this relation, but also on law. What is the national law saying? And how do we affect this, or how do we bring the law aspect into also our research as well? So yes, it's a very important area, but all these falls under governance as well. So the type of governance, and if the government is proactive to migration research and is listening to researchers on these aspects of research in terms of prison migration or migration within the prisons and all that, then it can adapt to a proper, humane movement, but also based on national interest and national sovereignty and all those legal or the criminal codes and all the laws that exist. So this is something of the governance approach, the legal systems that the country is operating, and the relationship that it has with these other third countries. All other part of it could be just politics. It could be just interest in trade and other reasons why the two countries or countries would engage in this. But I think you are very right that this is another aspect of it. However, sometimes because we think that migration, and also again, one aspect of migration, African migration epistemology, is that migration should be free. People should not be restricted. So the moment that people are restricted or in confined, they are more or less not considered to be within the flow of migration anymore. And perhaps this is, and if you look at some of the even the scholars as well, it questions this in this prison or people who are in confinement, migration confinement literature as well. So this is what I can say. This is much more, but again, we need a research there. We need to understand, we need to, okay, what are the legal basis? How are governments reacting this way or that way? It's a matter of research. What kind of migration theories can we use, or what theories can we propose to sort of explain, to sort of guide some of these movements as well. The onus is still on us to work our way out, especially if we see this as a very viable, and I agree with you, as a viable research area to look at. Now, to go to labor migration agreements that are signed. I think many countries after Kenya and was Kenya and Germany signed that. Many Kenyans were like, "Oh, we are going to Germany the next day," and then other countries were also looking forward to signing this agreement. I think these are more of part of the externalization approach than what actually countries are looking out for. Because one thing I can say for sure, which also for some of us have also criticized many of these European countries, is sometimes what they say in terms of when they meet African partners and all that is different from the realities in their own countries. Because these migration partnerships, there is a voluminous research done about the need for labor and the labor force in these countries reducing and all that. Therefore, there's a need for labor. What is missing is what kind of labor. All the African countries having this labor in abundance at this moment as well. And if we want to take advantage of that, then we need to change even or think about our educational and our skill development approaches. Many are going in for AI or artificial intelligence and all these kind of technical areas as well. The countries, are we ready to, or do we have enough of these technical expertise to send out? The easiest way, though, what I've heard many people talk about is the nurses or healthcare professionals. Yes, even that, are we positioned to do that as well? So, and there is no really monitoring or evaluation frameworks that are there at that level. You have the individual government, especially some of the Western countries, their government evaluation entities trying to collect data about the movement and on. And of course, if you go to Eurostat, you'll find some statistics about some of these arrangements, but it's not really out there to know. And this is also where African scholars, we need to come in to research some of these as well, to actually understand, is this really beneficial? We need to look at the host country or the destination country, what is existing there, and what this partnership, whether it is realistic or not realistic. And if we need to criticize it for the governments to set up. Let me give a typical example. I was researching on Nigeria when I was working on their migration governance framework there. And then there was a typical, and now I'm going to mention the organization because this is past overview. So GIZ was doing this Nigeria, Germany centers. And in the agreement that they signed with the labor ministry at that time, it was written that the Nigerians can be in Nigeria and apply for jobs in Germany. So this was part of what they had signed for this center to be open. So this center was going to be training people, and then from there, people can apply for it. As at that time that contract was signed, Africans were on the last bottom of countries to be considered for labor opportunities. So they'll go for European country citizens, they'll go for Eastern European country citizens, American citizens, South American citizens, and all that. And Africans are on the last bottom. And there was no possible realization that you can stay in Nigeria and apply for this, but they had signed this. So I had to raise the alarm. I got in touch with the GIZ people. The ministry quickly canceled that contract, that partnership, renegotiated. GIZ partner there, they had changed new leadership, had to come in now and now give a different aspect of it that, okay, we are going to train people, give them the skills for the local labor market, and not to give them jobs from these centers. So these are a typical example. And as researchers, it's our duty to sometimes look at some of these, what is happening in those places, and bring it out to query some of these partnerships that are done there. So there is no transparency, if you ask me. There's no transparency around some of these policies and partnership labor migration agreements that are signed. And it is something that we need to call for these partnerships, interrogate it, research into it, and publish about it. And we can do that. In terms of remittances, yes, there is no better word than to use the word, the romanticization of remittances. Remittances flows are very, 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 they are very dynamic. When people are traveling and they say, take this money to my grandparents or my parents and all that, it's all a flow. But what we talk about are only the registered or the portals through which these amounts are going through. And there are certain right features to it. So you can only charge some portion of taxes on it and record the amount of money that can, but the direct government effort, the government benefits from it, that needs proper, really rethought into it. And government has to come up with products that can attract these kind of, and not to just calculate the amount of money that is sent in to people's families. And mind you, some of the amount that are sent also leaves the country. Because, for example, if I have a brother who I want to support to come or travel to another country or something, and I send money to this relative uses it to go and apply for visa, the money still goes back. So if you are counting what is coming in, you are only, it is not really clear in that. And who does some of these statistics? The World Bank and all that, calculating these things, but we hardly can put direct developmental figures to it. So yes, it's still very, very romanticized, and we are talking about how it's doing this or that, but the literature itself is still not really clear. You have a lot of people that have talked about it. Yes, you can research into how many people send, how for what amount. We know where money goes into to support what and what. Yes, this area of research is really there. But as to the government's claiming and for all the statistics that are out there, there is more work to be done to really clear out than just repeating the contributions that are coming in. Yeah. And did I leave anything? Our science, yes, our science. Our science. We have to start quoting ourselves. We have to start citing ourselves. We have to take our own research as interesting as possible. And we should not just be the receiving end of always people coming, or especially external people coming to us. It's not only that we don't collaborate, but even if your African partners are coming in to interview you for a research, we are sometimes not even willing to talk to them, but we are willing to talk to the non-African scholars in that. All these undermine our own work. But also, again, sometimes the pressure in our research institutions, and I must say this, the pressure of promotion, the pressure of just publishing, where sometimes we don't take the time to actually reconnect with what we are researching on. So sometimes we keep on jumping from one topic to the other based on where the flow is coming from and all that. But if we have studied from other places, people can stick with a particular topic, really become expert in that topic, in that area. And it's okay to also do that as well. And then we get the authority if we develop our research in particular areas and become authority in there and share. And when we get to that point, we shouldn't just be granting interviews to externals who come, take our words, go and publish it, and then it's theirs. But we should negotiate to partner in writing or co-author in some of these works and than just becoming resource persons for others to just come and take our knowledge and go. And this is also part of knowledge reproduction. So we should reproduce within and not just produce for outside. And I think it's part of the way. As for the biases in the journals and all that, yes, it's going to be there. It's going to be there. We have to look for alternatives. I mean, even the geopolitical sense, they said monopoly, unipolar world is dying out. There's going to be multipolar and all those kind of. So we should also do other polars in our own, but still add quality to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Doug. I will take the last round of questions, then we end it here. There is 2 questions on the chat box. I'll read that. Before Freeman, you'll be the last to ask questions. So the first one says, how do we deal with ethical approvals in conducting research that could be accepted globally, especially when they are not students? And the second one says, how do you look at external research policies in relation to African research and researchers? Freeman, please kindly ask your question or contribution. Then that will be the last session for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. No, thank you so much for this presentation and then the answers you provided so far. My question or input, I think you mentioned in the past in your last submission, but I have interest in the Africanization you mentioned earlier in your presentation. And then I wanted to ask, where do we start from? And I think the last point you made touch on that. Are we starting from philosophy? Are we starting from African philosophy? Do we have African theories? Do we have African methods? I am asking this because last year I was at a certain conference, and then someone presented a paper. I think she worked on Africa, Kenya also. And she mentioned that crop failed and then people still didn't move. But coming from a farming background in Africa, I know most African communities don't specialize in one crop. So in my community, a farmer may have at least 2 crops. Some go even to 9 or 10 or 11. So if my maize fail, I have cassava to survive on. Maybe I might have plantain to survive on. So this is where the African system, understanding the African system comes to play. So I'm really, really interested in Africanization of this migration knowledge. Where do we start from? Then this one is just a point you mentioned that there's climate mobility research also growing. And I want to add that there's also climate immobility. So in the face of climate change, the debate also is that more people are also staying behind. So it's not only about the movement, but those who are also staying, how are they surviving? So this is another aspect that is also growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Freeman. So Doug, address the last question. Then
Thank you.
wrap up.
Thank you. So thank you. I'll start with the yes, like you mentioned. So I said in the climate that there is also this the climate mobility and mobilities also need attention. So it's there, and it's very true. And this, we don't just have to pay attention to it. We have to ask why, and add the African meaning to why sometimes people don't want to move. The ancestral connection, the other reasons why people don't want to move, and as well. So that's very true. That's just by the way. The Africanization, yes. I have always argued that it is the methods are not really the problem. The methods are not really the problem. It is the interpretation and the use of those words and the concepts that is acceptable, that we know it is there, and sometimes getting as close as possible term to say what it might mean for other people. When it comes to this, it's a matter of communication as well. Let me give a typical example. The Ghanaians on the platform perhaps will understand. I'm working on a paper about return labels. And then when Daddy Lumba, one of the greatest Ghanaian musicians, died, I was listening to one of the songs, and actually in the song, I got so much for the paper that I'm writing on. This paper, this song, Yayaka Control, it is amazing. The terminologies that are used there, it's actually the linguistics that I've been looking for. So I'm looking at Akan and Yoruba languages, the framing of returnees in there and the labels there. And we have this there. And the methods to analyze this is actually very clear and straightforward. And for methods, nobody owns those methods. We all contribute to developing those methods in our research way or the other. However, our positioning, even when we know that this is coming from us, how we stress on the importance of it and the need for it becomes then the issue. So sometimes in perhaps we don't, I don't know, but how do I say it? We tend to either over Africanize it or under Africanize it, because Africanizing something doesn't mean also that we don't question it. We don't become critical about it. And I think sometimes this is the point where we can be critical about our own African positions that are there already. If we take about the content, the concept, and the names and the labels from it, we need to be very critical about it as well. For example, let me give you, I was in a conference where a fellow scholar was talking about drug abuse and all that. And it was more about, there was no discussion about the methodology that was used. There was no question about the ethical approaches and the standardized processes. But it was more about, yes, these are the types of parenting that can result in a child being a youth going into drug abuse or not into this. And that was the point. And you are sitting there asking, but you can still go further to really break it down and all that. But just by insisting that the African view, if you're parenting and is this like this and that, it is not like that for every African. So even when we are Africanizing, we need to understand that Africa is still homogeneous as well. So we need to start from understanding, for me, understanding what Africa means. Africa as a concept, a term, a name, or as an identity. How do we break this into our, so if you look at Africa as, and then all the other connectedness of Afro this, Afro that, Afro this, then we need to be very careful also about that. So we need to first theorize Africanization in our research if we want to Africanize our research. We think about, okay, I say Africa in this context, but Africa here means A, B, C, D. I talk about this, we give context into what we are talking about and follow some of the evidential processes. So not just claiming that this is how we do it in Africa, but also indicating how I did it in this. I know sometimes we do all these things, but still get the blocks along the way. And this is something that might never stop because we have to continue fighting for it. But I also think that, yes, there are some of the concepts where we have to start from by breaking them down one by one. Or someone also says I should look at Akosua Japon's Odo Matise Waware Nansu Minim se Krata Anti. Yes, it's also there. I looked at that one as well. And now the question about how do we deal with ethical approval? I think that was covered last week, actually. So I may not really go into that. But the other part of it where we can be globally accepted, especially when they are not students. Sometimes it's not necessarily about who is student and who is not student. Students become lecturers and professors and all that. So, and I always say I'm always a student in the process. But I think it is critical that we don't just copy how it is accepted out there, but if we are consistent in our approaches. I think consistency is sometimes one of the things that we might be undermining in our approaches. So even methodological consistency. Of course, migration is very fluid. Yeah, for every topic, you have to think of different methodology, different approach to use and all that. But in our interpretation, there has to be some, like how a musician would leave something in their songs, that the moment you take it, you realize this is an underpinning voice going in there. I think we can do that. And when there's this consistency in our work, we will be accepted. We will be accepted. I mean, there are people that even if our research offends, so-called offends, and they don't want to see at some in a different context because we have been consistent, they would want to publish our work. So I think it's not a lost fight, and there is no magic bullet to actually get that going. But consistency could be, in my view, could be helpful in that. Again, when we look at external research policies, I'm not really sure that there are research policies that is different from what our internal research policies are. What I'm saying is that there is no superior research policy, and that we have a not so superior policy, research policy, but it's rather the external migration policies, which is more from the governance approaches or governance side, which dictates what our government should be interested in, but also dictates what our researchers should research on. And this we all have admitted in some of the contributions, that sometimes we go with the funding because that's where the money is coming from. I gave an example where EU spent a lot of money looking into how or the root causes of migration. And many of us researchers, we jumped on for that purpose, So it is not only about, there's no external policy but on research, but it is a policy of externalization where they dictate where the research agenda should go and all that. And yes, sometimes we might go in there for the funding of it, but through that, our voice from such research should still not just be Eurocentric voices, but we should also take it that it's a responsibility to educate those who don't know about our African narrative, about the African context, to give a proper account of what the African narrative and African context is.
Thank you very much, Doc. We are so much grateful to you for the insight you shared today. Those who joined late, I will just do a short recap. Doc mentioned there are key mobility trends in Africa, and he said more migration happening in Africa. And the narrative also, shows the opposite. And Africa also hosts more of IDPs than foreign literature states. And the labor migration, because of the youthful population in Africa, is going to continue. And women contribute 47 to 50% of African migration. So that needs to also be taken into consideration when we're talking about migration in Africa. And also the challenges that we face as researchers, data gaps and compatibilities, and underrepresentation of African scholars that we just mentioned, that he has explained that we should try to cite ourselves so that we will be known out there. Then access and funding as well. Then the emerging trend, those who are on the platform looking for topics to write about during their thesis can take advantage of this. It said climate and mobility measures, African cities as a hub, a migration hub, health and mobility, then digitize and mobility. Well, and then the future research trends, as I already said, the youthful population in Africa is going to continue. Then intensity of urbanization trends, and all that. And migration is backed by aspiration, and you should also consider the climate change patterns. So on this note, I would thank Doug Kwaku Arhin Sam. We are so much grateful to you for taking your time to be part of this lecture, or to be to be a resource person. We are so much grateful, and we hope anytime we call upon you, you willingly come and share your thoughts and insights. So thank you very much for being part of this lecture. The participants online, we are so much grateful for allocating some time for this research, for this program. We hope that you join future ones as well. I'll leave it to Dr. Ada to tell us if there are any further announcements. Thank you very much. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Stella, and then thank you, Dr. Kwaku Arhin Sam, for this insightful presentation. Please, colleagues, next week, Friday at the same time, we'll be having a lecture for Ambassador Dr. Emmanuel Enos. So please be looking out for the flyer and then the Zoom link to join next week, Friday, for another insightful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Nice
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.